Alrighty, everybody. So we're talking Slav games. Uh, I was playing a game on the couch, just sitting there, hanging out, watching TV, and my opponent opened up this game with D4. So normally when I play the Queen's Gambit, I play a reverse move order with the idea of I'm going to transpose into the Queen's Gambit declined, but this knight does also hint at going into one of the Indian games. And while I don't know the Indian games, I know that they are strong and a lot of people like them. But in this case, I typically I always end up going for the Queen's Gambit declined line. But this time, since I'm studying the Slav, I said, you know what? I'm going to keep my options open. So I went for the main line, d4, d5, thinking that maybe we'll get into a Slav game. And sure enough, my opponent pushes c4. So I push c6, and now we are fully into the Slav. My opponent continues developing, and since I'm studying the Slav and I wanted to see if I could pull off a trick, I went for the early capture. My opponent got their knight up, so I moved this early. I should have gotten my knight out first, so the correct move order would be to move my knight, then my opponent moves their knight, and then I capture. I went a little greedy, and then I went for the b5 move. So this is the little trap that's in the Slav, and I wanted to see how it goes. I wanted to see what it looked like in real life. My opponent went for this Slav Gambit, which we kind of talked about, I think, a little bit. The Geller Gambit. My memory's not good, but we're going to look. No. Okay, no. So maybe it's not. But I thought that this was some kind of gambit where normally your opponents are going to push a4, but instead they can push e4 instead of a4. The idea being that a4 does block out their knight from getting around to the edge of the board. And so when we push b4, that pawn is not there. And notice if my opponent pushed a4, I'm going to ignore it anyway. So if my opponent pushed a4, I'm just going to push past. And then so this allows my opponent to have this escape square for the knight, doesn't trap it in, and can simply remaneuver the knight back into the game pretty quickly. So this is an interesting move order. I have never faced it before, and I really haven't studied it much. So it's something to consider. But in this case, I decided to just continue developing. Notice I develop with tempo. And now my opponent gets the a4 move out. So now I'm pressuring his knight, which in this case, the knight is the only defender of the e4 pawn. So this does give me a little bit of something. My opponent moves his knight back home. Now this is one of the moves that we didn't talk about specifically because a2 and e2 seem to be better move options because moving the knight back home is a full tempo loss. Now this does allow your opponent to just remaneuver the knight. So is it better or worse? I don't know. But this was a very interesting game. I do now have an attack on the c4 knight, c4 pawn. I just decided to go ahead and open up my dark square bishop because that's kind of what the main line is. Assuming that the knight is here on a2 with pressure on my b pawn. That's fine though. So I just decided to go ahead and develop. I could have grabbed the pawn, but I chose not to just in case. Which point in time, my opponent captured. He got his gambited pawn back, and then we just continued developing. I don't know if this is the correct pawn move. When I go back and look at my notes, I'm not happy with this pawn move because it allows a capture here, and this pawn is still undefended. So notice it takes away the diagonal from my dark square bishop. In retrospect, I feel like I should have gone with a5 instead. It defends this pawn without blocking off my dark square bishop. So yeah, let me look at the engine. Let's see what the engine says at this point in time. So the engine says that we are about even. Black has a very slight, little bit of an advantage, not much. But yeah, the advantage completely changes. It's about a full point of advantage, so essentially a pawn. So this is basically throwing away a full pawn. Because my opponent can capture here, and then that would force me to capture back. And, you know, I don't know. It just doesn't seem like a strong move. Like I said, if I were to do it again, I'd probably push from here. Or actually, if I were to do it again, I'd probably just capture. Yeah, that's what the engine says. Yep, the engine says capturing, yeah. Because this pawn is defended, right? This pawn is defended, so I don't have to do anything about it. So I can just swing up here and capture. And if I have to, I can always retreat my knight, right back. But, oh well. So the game continued like this. My opponent made a very... so we did talk about this when we were talking about that Slav gambit. I forget what it's called. But that Slav gambit where you can push this, this e5 pawn, and now that forces your knight to have to remaneuver. So there's a few places you could remaneuver to, here, or even here if you really want to. Technically, yes, you could jump up to e4, but it's an undefended square, so you'd have to probably get something to defend it with. Just some thoughts. Either way, I decided to go knight d5. It's a defended square. If my opponent wants to trade, I'm okay trading, getting rid of one of his bishops. I think my opponent meant to castle here. I think that's what this move should have been. I think my opponent fully intended to castle. I have the game set on Zen mode, so during the course of the game, I don't have chat. I don't know who my opponent's name is. I don't have access to their rating. I don't have access to takebacks. So on my phone, I have it fully set up in Zen mode. So when I'm playing games on my phone, there's the idea behind Zen mode is that you're not looking at your opponent's rating and going, oh no, they're rated so high that I'm panicking, or oh no, they're rated so low I can goof off. You have to treat every opponent identically. There's no chat, so there's no chance of BM from either side. And there's no takebacks. So I think my opponent meant to castle here. I'm fairly certain. And unfortunately, this is the move he decided to go with. Whether intentional or not, I don't know. But it seems like this would be logically a castle. So from here, the game kind of continues, but not great. So I decided to go ahead with a fianchetto structure. My knight is now helping to defend these corners. If I need to remaneuver my knight, I can. I can always remaneuver it back, down here, maybe up here somewhere. But I decided to go ahead and fianchetto structure. My opponent made the trade. He maneuvers his knight out of the way. So we know what my plan is. Now, I think this remaneuver was to put pressure on my backwards pawn here that is no longer defended. But the good news is I can defend that and develop at the same time. So this defends this pawn and develops. My queenside pawns are advanced, right? We are pushing the queenside pawn, so I'm putting pressure on my opponent's queenside, which is why, again, I think castling kingside was probably what his intention was. Now my opponent has put pressure on my d pawn. I probably should have swung my bishop up to defend the d pawn, but I was concerned that there's a little bit of pressure along the f7 pawn. Not a lot. My opponent's already traded off his light square bishop, so I don't have to worry about it. His dark square bishop isn't really going to do anything, but a pawn or defend checkmate. So I know that it's not checkmate. I know that, but the adrenaline at the time, right? In the heat of battle, I decided that it was better for me to go ahead and castle. Now I'm fully protected, and yes, I am losing a pawn. If I go back and look at the engine, we'll see what the engine says. Wow, the engine does not like that move by my opponent at all. I wonder why. It says castling is still the third best option. Interesting. That's really interesting. I would not have noticed that. So the idea here now is now my opponent has captured, but he has an undefended queen in the center of the board. So I did spend some time trying to find ways to trap this queen. Does it show? Yeah, I guess about 45 seconds all told. 40. About 40 seconds looking at ways to bully my opponent because they have an undefended queen in the center of the board. Let me get rid of this. They have an undefended queen in the center of the board, and I have a defended queen, and all I gotta do is make a discovery now. So the engine is saying this. Oh, okay. At the time, I saw this move, but I just assumed my opponent could capture back this way. I completely forgot that I had a bishop sitting there. I completely forgot that I had the bishop sitting there. Huh. Oh well. Either way, the move that I decided to go with was this check. Again, just bullying the fact that my opponent's king is not safe, not safe-ish, and seeing if I can find ways to convince to bully my opponent's queen. So now I'm putting. At the time, I was thinking I was putting double pressure, but I guess I've got triple pressure on that pawn there. Now I do have a decent discovery, but it allows my opponent's queen to escape. All right, that's fine. It's not great. I'm not entirely happy about that situation, but I do have an undefended pawn now that I want to get defended. And if we look at the material on the board, 2 pieces, 2 pieces, 2 rooks, 2 rooks. So we're basically even in material. Pawn-wise, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4. Pawn-wise, I'm actually down 2 pawns now because of this, right? That's the second pawn I'm down. So I'm down 2 pawns technically. Let's make it 3 pawns. What I do have going for me, though, is my opponent is no longer allowed to castle, and I'm all defended down here, and they've got some development left to do. So just continue developing. I am now looking again. I have a defended queen. My opponent has an undefended queen. This is my next tactic I'm looking at. So sliding my bishop down here to capture this pawn, get one of my pawns back. But more importantly, it's threatening the queen and the rook at the same time. So my opponent has to save one. So that was my next thought process. And now the question is, what do you do? How do you defend both the queen and the rook? And my opponent moved very quickly, only took 2 seconds to slide his rook over and dropped his queen. So, game over, GG. That's all there is to say about it. So I don't want to spend too much time talking about the end of this game because it was a little funky. Basically, my opponent being unable to castle, didn't castle it correctly, and then drops a queen, and then he resigned. So let's not talk too much about the end of the game. Let's just look at the beginning of the game because it was a textbook Slav. And we were prepared for it, right? So we went ahead, we went for our little trap. And I think now I can really see why moving this knight first, because that moving the knight first does cover the e4 pawn. So when my opponent pushed e4, if my knight had been sitting here, I could have had some pressure on it pretty quickly. So if my knight had already been here, that would have been nicer. But now my opponent can simply push past and force me to figure out what to do with my knight. Yeah, and I really should have taken there. I'm mad at myself for not. And then this pawn move. This pawn feels awkward on c6 because it's just kind of exposed by himself. If I do push a5 to defend, then I've got like this little bitty chain here, and I've got a chain here, and this guy just by himself, just hanging out. It just feels awkward. So that's why I was thinking, well, I'll just push him up and make him, support his brother. Not worth it. 100% not worth it. Just let this pawn sit here. The knight will tuck in behind it, and everybody will be fine. Yeah, I think, like I said, I think castling here would have changed the game, and I probably would have had to struggle a little bit because I did give up so many pawns. 3 pawns is nothing to sneeze about, right? Giving away 3 pawns, that's pretty beefy. If my opponent had been able to trade down pieces, um, it could have gotten really ugly really fast. But luckily, I had this tactic here, which if my opponent captured, then I capture back, then they can get the rook over. Yeah, the engine says black has a slight advantage, but probably would have taken a lot of energy and effort to figure out how to hold it for me. This slight advantage is nothing that I would call a winning endgame for me. But maybe double up here. No, because that gives your opponent a chance to defend the pawn. I'll just go ahead and take before they can get defended. The knight covers that square. The bishop does too. Now the engine says go ahead and sacrifice this exchange. Interesting. So now it's a bishop and a rook versus. But I guess in all this though, black is picking up some pawns. Ah, can't do that. Right. So we are going to pick up another pawn. Notice we do not have back rank issues because our bishop is always here to defend. Interesting. The safety of the king versus unsafe king, and the game just falls apart. Okay. Well, either way, guys, this was a Slav game. I'm going to add it to the Slav. It's not the greatest example of a Slav, but it starts out really interesting, and we do learn a lesson that it is better to go ahead and develop than it is to try to capture. And we tried to set our trap, but our opponent knew what to look for, and he just retreated back. And this seems like actually not too bad. I would say it's on par with e2. Because you can just rotate it. Oops, you can rotate the knight right back into the game pretty quick. Can you, though? Yeah. Okay, you can rotate the knight back into the game pretty quick. All right. Anyway, guys, this was an interesting game. I wanted to show it. Don't look at the end game as an example of what to do or what not to do. I think because my opponent was unable to castle or chose to castle funny or screwed up, I don't know. But I think because of that, maybe my opponent was tilted and possibly made bad moves. I don't know. But the main point of this was to look at a Slav opening. We got into a Slav opening, and we can learn from it. So, all right, guys, I'll catch you later. Bye.